Hello and welcome back. In the last video, we added this add argument to the management command, so we can go --test and --verbose. Also, I added the ability to add these options to a graph set, and then also in the graph set, I added this poll skip option to the constructor. And in this video, I'm going to actually implement the poll skip. And also I'm going to start moving towards actually generating the graphs. So far in this video series, I've only been doing backend stuff. And I'm going to start, the backend part is mostly done. Not every feature has been implemented, but the overall architecture is in place. And so I'm going to start moving towards the front end part of this, which would be just basically the graphs. And so before I can generate the graphs, I need to make some code to generate test data. So you can't make a graph unless you have data to actually put on your graph. And so I'm going to create like a test function that produces test data so I can actually have some data to show on the graph. So before I get started, there's a bug that I discovered that I'm going to fix. And so basically, when I refresh the admin page, I get this bug. It says float argument required, not none type. And this page right here is the Django error page, and it's really, really helpful. Sometimes, like in the Django admin, sometimes when there's a bug, it just puts a dash where the bug happened, and that's really annoying. But other times when there's a bug, it'll actually generate this page. And whenever the page happens, it's a good thing because you can usually pretty easily find out what's the problem. So the way you do this is you just scroll down at the very bottom. All this that you see is the traceback. But we want to go to the very bottom, and it'll show you where the actual bug occurred. So in this case, it's happening on line 15 of the admin.py file. And right here, it's trying to, this is the total time. So we have that column that shows the total amount of time it took to generate that tick. And the way it's doing it is it's this line right here. It's just pulling all of the poll results associated with the tick. And then it's aggregating the seconds to poll field, and then adds it up. And then that gets returned into this total. It's a dictionary, and then we're pulling the X from the dictionary, which is right here. You can call this anything. I just decided to call it X. And then it's turning that into a float. But the problem is it's getting a none instead of a float. So, and if we scroll down here, we can click on local variables, and it's telling us that this total dictionary down here, it has none instead of X. And my hypothesis as to why this is happening is because there's a tick that doesn't have any poll results associated with it. So when we do the aggregate, it's saying none because there's nothing attached. So what I'm going to do is go to this admin file, and I'm just going to just say 0 if not X. I'll start. So in the case of X being none, it'll just print 0. And then otherwise, if total X is not none, or if it's not, if it's an actual number, then it'll do this, and it'll be a float, and it'll turn it into a string that with 2 decimal places. And I'm just going to take this X out and put it up here, just to make it like simpler. Now that should fix the problem. And there it is. And as you can see here, it says 0. And it's saying 0 because there's there's 0 here, and there's 0 here. And up here is there's 0 here, and there's 0 here. So the actual bug, this being none, occurs when there's no successful polls or no error polls. And it's kind of weird because down here, we're calling .count on when there's 0. So this is 0 and it's saying .count and it's returning 0. But up here, when there's 0, it returns none, which is kind of inconsistent, but it's not something we can do anything about because this is all Django. So I'm just going to have to say 0. Yeah, so it took 0 seconds because there was no polls occurred. So that's the bug. And this is not something that's going to come up a lot. Like usually when you have ticks, you're going to have some poll results. And so down here it's just blank because there's no results. But when we're testing, we might actually have zero polls. So now that's done. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm at a field here. I'm just going to say ID. And this is just a number. So each tick has a number associated with it. And this number we're going to use when we do the next feature we're going to do. So the next feature is we're going to actually implement this poll skip. So what we're going to do is in the models, actually one more thing I'm going to do. So this code right here we wrote yesterday, it doesn't really belong here because this function is make tick. And this down here has nothing to do with making a tick. So it doesn't make sense to have this put here. So this function already is like really long. Like it starts on line 17 and it goes until line 62. So that's a pretty big function. And we don't want functions to be big. So we want to make them as small as possible just to make it easier to kind of read. So I'm going to move this function out into somewhere else. So to do that, I'm going to make a new file. I'm just going to call it utils. And I'm going to move this into that. So I'm just going to remove it. And we're going to call this validate graph set. So the graph set is what gets passed in. And I'm just going to return it. And so now we want to import this into the models. And then there we go. And we're going to test to make sure that it still works. Oh, this part needs to be removed. So I'm just going to make sure that, yeah, so what I do here is I double click this and it puts a line around this word, and then it'll also match other instances of that word. So like if I double click text field, there's one up here, there's one up here. It's really useful. This is a feature of the text editor, and I use it a lot. So in this case, this line isn't, this graph set is not used anywhere. So I can remove it. And the bug we got here, it says global name graph set is not defined. And that's coming from line 3 of this validate graph set function within the utils file. So by the way, this is also a traceback. It's the same that was on that web page that we just looked at, the yellow and gray web page. And it's really helpful. So we're going to go to utils and just add this import up here, and there it is. So it's used down here and it's imported up here. Now, graph set instance is not defined. This is on line 52. I spelled it wrong. There we go. Yeah, now it works. And another thing I want to do is this variable name graph set instance. I don't really like that variable name. I want to just call it graph set instead. But the word graph set is already used up here. But up here it's only used once. So it happens here, and then this graph set turns into graph set instance. And the word graph set is not used anywhere else. So I'm just going to call this something else. I'm going to call this item. And I'll call this item. And then I'm going to just call this graph set. Yeah. And test it to make sure it still works. And it works. So now the next thing, I'm going to actually implement this this poll skip feature. So the way we're going to do it is based on this ID right here. We're going to do a modulo operation, and if the modulo operation equals 0, then that means we're going to do it, and if it's anything other than 0, then we're going to skip it. So we want to do this before this line, because this is where it actually happens. So we're just going to do it right up here. So if we have this variable test, and when test is run, we're just trying to test all of the graph sets to make sure that all of them work, and so we don't want to skip any of them. So this poll skip only applies when test is not being used. And so what we want to do is take the ID mod plus 1 just say if it does not equal 0, then we want to continue. But before we do that, we want to say if verbose. We want to print. Also, I want to use print as a function because we want this to be in Python 2 and Python 3. And in Python 3, print is a function. In Python 2, it's a keyword. So I'm going to change it here as well. And at the top, we'll say that was my caps lock. So this tells Python 2 to make the print an actual function. And in Python 3, it ignores this line. So yeah, now we want to say, before we actually skip, we want to print out on the screen to tell the user what we're doing. So we basically just want to copy this line right here. But instead of the result, we're just going to say skipped. And the reason why we do +1 is because because by default, poll skip is going to be 0, and you can't mod something by 0 because it'll raise an error. So we add just 1 to it. We could say you just set the default to 1. So here you can just say 1, and then that would work. But that's kind of unintuitive because you're saying you're skipping 1. You want it to skip 0 to mean you're not skipping anything. So skip 0 means we mod by 1, because when you mod by 1, the answer is always 0. So that's how we do that. Now I think it's time to test this. So make tick verbose. Also, yeah, so now it said skipped. Right here, skipped. We skipped the force failure. So force failure, it says skip 2. So it does it once and then it skips it twice. So it should skip, then yeah, skipped. And then if we do it again, it should do it. Yeah, failure. Then it should skip it, and then failure, yeah. And the system load, we skip 1. So it should alternate. So it skipped, and then it did it, and then it skipped, and then it did it, then it skipped, then it did it, and then it skipped. So that's correct, that's working. One more thing I want to do is actually print the tick ID. Yeah, doing tick number 52. And so 52 mod, what is it? Mod 2. 52 mod 2 equals mod 2 equals 0. So that's why this happened. Yeah, wait, hold on. 52, oh, it's 52 plus 1. Plus 1 is 1. Yeah, so that's why it's, wait a minute. This is, it's skip, it skipped 2, so it's 2 plus 1. Yeah, and it's not equal to 0, so we do it. If it was equal to 0, then we wouldn't do it. So we know that's working. And that's going to be it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to build a testing utility. It'll be down here. It'll be called make test ticks, and it will just generate a bunch of ticks. It'll generate like 1,000 ticks, and then another one called make pull results, and that will add just a random number as a result to each tick. And the point of that is to actually populate the database with data so we can actually make graphs. Because there's no point trying to make graphs when you only have 20 data points. That's not going to make a very good graph. So now I'm going to commit. And that's it. And I'll see you next video.